Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's PNA Senate Seminar Series event. My name is Monica Koken, and I am a senator on the Academic Professional and Administrative PNA Senate. We are delighted to see another great turnout for this virtual event series with civil service and PNA staff from all campuses and Extension. I want to thank everyone who submitted questions in advance for our panelists. We appreciate and value your engagement at this event. Our topic today is how to write an effective award nomination. We have broadened the subject slightly to also include tips on writing letters of recommendation. Joining us today are Aaron Heath, Director, University Senate Office and University Awards and Honors, Jeanette Poole, Senate Associate, University Senate Office and Assistant to the Director of University Awards and Honors. Aaron Heath's and Jeanette Poole's portfolios include managing and supporting the work of the All University Honors Committee, as well as managing and overseeing the nomination and review processes for the President's Award for Outstanding Service, the Regents Professorship, and the recently created Vicki R. Courtney Award for Outstanding Service to the University Senate Governance. Aaron and Jeanette will be talking today about their perspectives gained from reviewing nominations. Here to talk about her perspective of writing and preparing award letters and nomination packets, Lee Allen is the former assistant to the department head of medicinal chemistry and former assistant to the director of the Institute for Therapeutics Discovery and Development. Please use the Q&A feature to share your questions or comments during the presentation. We will hold questions and comments until the QA portion of the event. Without further ado, please welcome our panelists, Aaron, Jeanette, and Lee. Aaron is going to get us started.
So university honors and awards, and Monica did touch on a lot of these, but Jeanette and I staff the All University Honors Committee, which oversees a number of awards, including honorary degrees, the Outstanding Achievement Award, the Award of Distinction, the Alumni Service Award, and something new to our portfolio this year are building namings and renamings. And so back in February of last year, the Board of Regents approved a new policy delegating authority for the process of naming and renaming or revoking building names to this committee. And we've been in the process of finalizing processes with that. So that's also been a very interesting addition. I do also want to mention that University Awards and Honors is actually in office. And so when we talk about awards and honors, we're not necessarily referring to all awards and honors available at the university. So next slide, please. So we also coordinate processes, including the nomination process and process for making recommendations for the Regents Professorship, as well as President's Award for Outstanding Service and the Vicki R. Courtney Award for Outstanding Service to University Senate Governance. And the reason that there are asterisks next to the last two is because our staff actually take more of a lead role on coordinating those final two. So next slide, please. So briefly, the President's Award for Outstanding Service was established 25 years ago in 1997, I believe under then President Nils Hasselmo. It recognizes faculty and staff, whether they are current or retired, and there are up to 12 awards given each year. So some years, given the quality of nominations, it was really difficult to identify only 12 awardees. And other years, given the quality of some nominations that were submitted, we may not actually get to 12. So we want to make sure that all 12 are of very high quality when submitted. Awardees are given a $1,000 stipend. And this year for the 2023 PAOS, the deadline for submitting nominations for the 2023 award is March 3rd, 2023. So Jeanette, if you could briefly go to the webpage regarding this award. So I'm not going to go through this with you today, but this is just one of those resources that looks at the process that we have in more detail. And so it goes through what's included in a nomination dossier, our deadlines, as well as a list of the previous award recipients. So we can go ahead and go back to the presentation. And next slide. One more, there we go. So in 2021, the Vicki R. Courtney Award for Outstanding Service to University Senate Governance, which we affectionately call within Team Senate, the Vicki, was named after my predecessor in this role. So Vicki Courtney was a longtime director of both the University Senate Office and Awards and Honors, and she had retired back in December of 2021. And this award recognizes current civil service faculty, P&A, and students who demonstrate a very positive impact on University Senate governance. We have up to 4 awards given each year. Last year was the inaugural award. And given that it was so new and we were trying to figure out different ways to engage those who are involved in governance on submitting nominations, we ended up with 2 awardees. We had Missy Juliet from Civil Service, who is now on our staff, and also Amy Pittenger, who was a longtime leader in faculty governance, were the awardees for last year. This year, we are really hoping to increase the pool of nominees. Like the PAOS, we have a $1,000 stipend given to each awardee, and the deadline for submitting nominations is also March 3rd. And I will mention that 2021 was the first year that funding was attached to this award. It was originally created in 2014 and came with recognition and a certificate. So Jeanette, if you want to also briefly go on this webpage. So what you will see on our website is that we try very hard to list the criteria and the processes in a consistent format. So you will see that you have the overview of the award, which I had just talked about. Then you have our selection process. And this is the one that the University Senate Office actually, like I said, oversees. We rely on the recommendation of the selection committee, which is listed there. Then you also have who the nominees can be. And again, the key is to be actively involved in University Senate governance. And then from there, we also have information on what constitutes an effective nomination packet. So you'll see it's pretty standard to have a letter from your nominator, letters of support, as well as a record of service. It gives the information on where to submit, as well as any other information that you may find helpful. So Jeanette, if we can go back to the slide deck. Okay, so now to the heart of it. Okay, we'll want to go again one more. So again, we're talking about what we are looking for as reviewers for nominations that are submitted. And so first and foremost is really that strong letter of nomination. And what you will hear us talk about again and again is demonstrate, demonstrate, demonstrate. It's not necessarily what an individual does that's an accomplishment. It's really illustrate what that accomplishment is. How is it that that accomplishment or accomplishments made such an impact? Also, the compelling letters of support. So we have a link here to, I jokingly refer to it as somewhat thesaurus.com, but this is another resource if you want to select it, Jeanette. So here is just one resource that you can use, which is a list of adjectives and nouns that were pulled from basically nominations of those who eventually went on to be awarded some type of award. And so this can be something that can serve as somewhat of a writing cue for you. If you're trying to find another word, say, what's a good one? If you have somebody who is nationally known or respected, what are some other words that you can use? Here it's specialist, leader, or authority. So I'll just kind of let you look at that for a minute. So we really do want to try to provide as many resources as we can, especially to increase the engagement related to our awards. Jeanette, if you want to go ahead and go back to the presentation. The other thing, which may not sound like a necessarily a big deal, but really a complete nomination packet. And so oftentimes what can happen is that we receive really great letters. We receive a very strong packet of information, only it comes in right at the deadline, and then we find out that information is missing. And so that's something that by giving yourself just a little bit more time to make sure that you truly have everything you need, we can then go ahead and review that particular packet, because we cannot review incomplete packets. And so Jeanette, if you can also select that information. So if we scroll down a bit to just what is included in a packet, and you've seen some of this before, but you'll just want to make sure that when say you are submitting somebody for the PAOS, look at this website and make sure that you see that you have your cover page, you have your nominator letter, you have a letter from the person the nominee reports to, you have your supporting letters, and you have their CV or job description. And there's also some related resources that go through each of these in more detail. But really, we've seen a fair number of packets that end up being submitted incomplete. So if we can go back to the slide deck. Next slide. So letters of support. So you get asked to write a letter of support and you say, oh no, what do I do? I know even serving in this role and previous roles at the university, I get asked to have been asked to write letters of support, and immediately the blood pressure goes up by 30 points. And I think, oh my gosh, what is it I'm going to do? And so just some tips for when you're writing. Verbs really tell the story. This goes back to demonstrating, talking about actions, specific actions that the individual has done. Also, we've seen some packets where you know that the person who is serving as a nominator will send out some basic information regarding the nominee, which is certainly a good thing. Yet what can sometimes come back are identical letters of support. And so we want to make sure that the nomination packet includes information that really presents that full picture of a given individual and their experiences. And what is it as a total that you think makes this person worthy of receiving an award? So if you've worked with somebody for 25 years and you receive a request for a nomination letter, and you know that they are really good at very detailed research, but the bio that you receive is about something completely different, I wouldn't necessarily write about the things that are completely different. Write about what you know, because your story, you're serving really as an advocate for that person, and we're really relying on that story to be compelling. Also, keep in mind that the nomination packet is the only information the committee will be reviewing. So that means we'll use the example back in 2016. Prince received a posthumous award from the University of Minnesota. Now you hear the name Prince. We all know that he was extremely eminent in his field, incredibly talented, and certainly worthy of an award. And yet the individual or group that submitted Prince's nomination still needed to go through and really demonstrate their case. So we couldn't just go by, well, it's Prince, of course we're going to give him an award. It's really up to the nominator to submit that compelling story, because we're not to consider anything else in the process. And finally, letter writers may find some of the sample questions helpful that we provide here. So we won't go through them, but this is just another resource that can help letter writers sort of prompt what it is that they want to convey in their message. So if we go back to the slide deck. So we did put together, and I think for the sake of time, we'll just go through one example. So this is a letter that's an excerpt from somebody who received an award, but we took out some descriptors. So you can see that this individual was the co-founder and president of WebPT, a medical record platform for rehab therapy. She began managing physical therapy clinics. 80% of the industry was using paper and pen at the time. WebPT changed the rehab therapy industry, which now has over 80% EMR adoption. Since the company's launch in 2008, it has grown exponentially. Today, it's the fastest growing EMR company in the country. She has been recognized as one of health data management's most powerful women in healthcare IT. So it is a good summary of this individual's accomplishments. Yet I don't know about you, but when I read the statement, I have no idea about what half of those things mean. So we know that WebPT is an electronic medical record platform. How big is it? How do we know that that's important? What's significant about 80% of the industry using paper and pen? In what way did WebPT change the rehab therapy industry? Those are just a few examples. And if you go on to the next slide, you will see some examples for how we demonstrated this individual's accomplishments. So we know that WebPT is the country's leading rehab therapy electronic medical record platform. So that's an idea of scope. What does that platform do? It enhances patient care and fueling business growth. So, and then the big deal about how 80% of the industry used to use paper and pen. Well, the WebPT resulted in expensive transcription and dictation bills, or the old method did. And WebPT transformed their industry. We also illustrate that the recipient actually led WebPT through some growth. And then we see that they now employ nearly 500 people and serve 83,000 professionals in 12,000 clinics. So by putting in those few nuggets of information, you can truly illustrate the scope of the individual's background and accomplishments. So next slide, and we'll go ahead and skip the second one, but you will have that later. So we also finally have more resources and information for you, which a lot of it, which we've talked about today. So some sample questions, descriptive language. We have a link to our website as well as the All University Honors Committee. And my contact information is on here too. And really there is no such thing as a bad or silly question. We want to increase this engagement and make this process more tangible to people. And if we can go to one last slide, we'd like to leave you with a quote from our president. At the University of Minnesota, we are committed to unlocking the greatest potential of our faculty, staff, students, and alumni, and others who exemplify excellence in teaching, research, and service, and who positively impact our community and the future of our state and society. Bestowing awards and recognition allows us to honor our recipients publicly while simultaneously bringing pride and vitality to our institution. So thank you again for the chance to present to you, and I will now turn it back over to Monica.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Jeanette. Lee, did you have any presentation you would like to do?
I don't have a presentation, but I have some thoughts before we go to Q&A, and I can provide these later for the handout material. But one of the things that I would say that I think Erin's presentation got at is follow directions. If there's a page or a word limit, follow it. I can't tell you how many times there is a rec letter where it asked to be only 2 pages and I would receive one that was 5. And would have to edit that down to fit the criteria. So one other nugget of wisdom is make sure that you confirm with the person you're asking for a rec letter that they can provide a positive recommendation letter for you. The last thing you want is to have a connection to someone, ask them to write a rec letter, and then you get just sort of a lukewarm or generic or vague letter of recommendation from them. And you really want somebody with enthusiasm, because I think that enthusiasm comes through when they write about you. The next nugget, I guess, is help your nominator help you. And so whenever you ask for a nomination letter, make sure you send your CV. If you want to, it would be really helpful if you could highlight things in your CV that you think may make you maybe stand out for the award or that you're very proud of. And also, if there's something that you perceive as a weakness based on the criteria for the award, feel free to talk to your nominator, maybe send a little narrative on what you've done to perhaps grow in that area or to improve in that area. And because your letter says a lot about and depends on the writer. So also, if you're having a hard time deciding between a few people to ask, think about who writes well, who would put in the time for you, and who knows you beyond surface level. Because the best letters are the most personalized letters. So if possible, let your primary writer, if there is such thing in the nomination as having sort of a letter of recommendation, then a support letter, let them know if they're the primary, who the secondary is. You could consider connecting them, or you could delegate, and I think Erin's presentation said this, kind of delegate who concentrates on what, so that you don't get the same letter from both people. It is relatively common practice these days, if you ask somebody to write a letter of recommendation, that they will ask you to pre-draft a skeleton of the letter. So you might hear that. And also, I think for one or both of the awards that Erin talked about, there's a list of who's on the panel. So consider your audience. Think about how to strategically address your audience. If you know your audience is tenured faculty, you might write a different letter than if your audience is a swath of people from student all the way up to faculty or administrator. So maybe consider a bit of strategy in how you talk, and if you're going to use jargon. Other tips, I always like seeing the nominee's name in that first paragraph in bold. Just draws your eye to it. You know who it's for. Try to use letterhead if possible. The University of Minnesota, I think that's accessible to a lot of people. When I was writing them prior to coming here as a grad student and postdoc, I actually made my own letterhead just so that it's not white margins. Try to avoid the "to whom it may concern." Address it to the selection committee, address it to, the name of the award. Just try to do something that makes it more possible than that generic line. If you can put someone's impact in something quantitative, and this kind of goes back to what Erin was talking about, if you can really quantify, put into numbers, and some of this overlaps with strengthening your CV and resume too. It's really ways to talk about kind of what you've been doing and your impact quantitatively, in addition to qualitatively. And I used a reference called power phrases. I can share that file. It's from a different institution, but I always liked how they set it out. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, don't be afraid to throw your hat in the ring. You are totally worthy of awards, and you have no idea what the nomination pool looks like. So definitely, if you see an award that you think you're qualified for, or that one of your colleagues is qualified for, really truly consider writing or asking for a nomination for that, because you honestly never know who you're up against. And okay, the last thing I'll say is, I ghost wrote a bunch of faculty tenure and promotion letters, and there's sort of a formula that you can follow. And if anybody has any questions about that during the Q&A, I'll be happy to follow up on that. It just didn't seem immediately relevant to the presentation, but happy to answer stuff about that.
Thank you so much, Lee. For our participants, if you want to use the Q&A feature to ask questions live, we will start queuing those up. First off, we're going to start with some of our pre-submitted questions. So my first one is going to be to Erin and Jeanette. Somebody asked, I'd love to know more about the challenge of depth versus breadth when working with a word limit.
Okay. So I will start, and Jeanette, feel free to chime in. So I'm going to speak about more personal experience as a writer with this. Is when I'm thinking about who's being nominated or who I'm writing a recommendation letter for, and I have this, say 500 word limit, I think about what is that one key message I want to get across about this person that I think puts them at the top in terms of whether it's an award or a position or something else. And so I will also try to think of maybe a personal story that I had that positively, that's a positive illustration of what I'm trying to demonstrate in my letter. I think personally, I tend to go more for depth as compared to breadth, because sometimes the breadth can be a whole lot of nothing in particular, as compared to if you know a part, of somebody very well, really going into depth with that one topic may also be beneficial, especially if you have other letter writers that will be focusing on different things. But Jeanette or Lee, I'm welcome to any other feedback on that.
I would just add that sometimes I think in writing letters, people may feel that, oh, I just have this small personal connection with this person, but it may be something that sort of changed your life around or changed the trajectory of your life. I would say in that case, really sinking your teeth into that situation and not, again, trying to cover everything that this person has done, but really focusing on how this person has made a difference, maybe in just one single person's life, but then they can extrapolate out that that's probably how they're going to operate in the world and behave with other people as well. But I like the idea of focusing on something very, very small and personal.
Thank you. I'm going to switch it over to Lee. What are the differences in writing for an internal versus an external recommendation letter? And Erin and Jeanette, feel free to pop in too.
One of the biggest things that comes to mind is that, again, it's kind of considering your audience. If you're going external, you really need to make sure that to explain maybe University of Minnesota jargon or things, and don't assume that everybody knows what MyU is, for example, and things that may be Minnesota specific. So you really need to probably spend a little bit more time on framing than you might with people who are intimately familiar with campus goings on and things like that, and any abbreviations or things like that. That's on that first comes to mind. I don't know if Erin and Jeanette, you have anything?
No, I think when I read that question, what I was thinking of was more about just making sure, regardless of your audience, making sure that you have all your facts accurate and that you're telling a compelling story. But your feedback, Lee, about really dialing it back to assume the person, especially if it's external, knows nothing about what you're writing about. Don't assume that people on the other side are intimately aware with a view of acronyms and similar inside things.
And that also comes in with like the quantitative things. And so like if you're talking about something at the University of Minnesota, frame it in a way that shows the impact. We are 5 campuses. We cover the state. There's X number of people. P&A Senate is this large. You're one of X number of people on this committee in a university system of X number of people, because I can't remember what it is. Things like that.
And that information is out on the University Senate website for those types of numbers too.
Monica, you're on mute, Monica.
Oh, thank you very much. Sorry about that. We'll move on to this next really good question. The next one is, how much impact does reputation or prestige of the nominator have? And I'm going to hand that to Jeanette or Erin.
I'll just give a punchline answer. In theory, it shouldn't. It's really about just the overall quality of the submission, regardless of who's sending it. And I know that it can be natural. I mean, I was part of staffing a committee last year that received a letter from Herbie Hancock. And I thought, how on earth in my career am I going to end up reviewing a dossier that includes a letter from Herbie Hancock? And yet really, it's not necessarily about the who, it's about the what. So Jeanette or Lee, if you want to add anything.
I think my perspective comes from being an admin on like faculty search and selection committees. And they specifically put you through search and selection bias awareness. And so, you know, you have to keep in mind two things that like Erin said, it's about the content. It's not necessarily about the writer. Of course, if you find a prestigious person who's willing to write your nominating letter, that would be great. I mean, that would be wonderful. But like I said earlier, if you're trying to decide between a couple of people, I would go for the person that really will spend the time, that will make it personal and would be enthusiastic to do it for you.
Excellent, thank you. Let's see here. We had a question for Erin and Jeanette, and this is specific to the awards that the University Senate office is responsible for. This person was interested in the nomination process for the Outstanding Service Award, as well as the other presidential nomination processes. So if you could walk us through, you know, what the process is of what you guys do.
So Jeanette, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll start with, let me just start with, was the question about the Vicky Award, the Governance Award, and the PAOS?
Yes.
Let's just say, go for the Vicky Award. Actually, the two have kind of similar timelines. We put out a call for nominations in the late fall, early winter. The decisions are made pretty much by the following March or April. And really an all call goes out, we receive nominations, a selection committee is established, and they read all of the nominations that come in and discuss them. For the PAOS award, that is a little bit older, a little bit more established. People are more aware of it. So it garners at this point a larger number of nominations. Within that award, the selection committee is very careful to make sure that it's kind of comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. I mean, you know, P&A staff can be awarded this, civil service can, bargaining unit, faculty. So it's kind of important that the selection committee is aware of, let's look at what a P&A staff person accomplishes within the scope of what their job asks them to do at the university. For example, if your job does not involve research, we're not going to compare you to some economics professor who just won the Nobel Prize in, you know, and has all the facilities and resources he or she needs to do research. So we really try to keep that kind of playing field level. The awards both culminate in you know, the financial award, an obelisk or a folder with a certificate in it. The PAOS award culminates in an event that last year, for example, was held at East Cliff. So there's some public recognition with a small invited group. Erin, anything you want to add? I'm not sure if I'm getting right to the questions, but the process, or I'm not sure if they're asking about how to submit.
Maybe this would help out. When you're going through and reviewing all the submissions, is there a scoring rubric that you use that people are judged against?
Okay, so with the PAOS, yes. That's an award, like I said, that was founded in or created in 1997. And so the committee over time has had number of years to create a rubric and revise it as needed. But basically, at least how it's happened in the last few years is each committee member receives all the dossiers, reviews them in detail, and then has specific criteria that they look at and try to figure out the extent that the dossier met that criteria. So if it's, significance of impact, they get ranked on I'm trying to remember, I think it's a 3-point scale right now. And then usually what ends up happening is at the start of the meeting where the selections are being made, it's reaching some sort of consensus on, okay, who in your view are of the top 15, or who should we not consider further? And then discussions are refined. But yes, that process is intended to be very objective. The Vicky Award, because that is new and because we had a very small number of applicants last year, we have not yet been at the point where we have, say, a true rubric that we're using, but that would be something that we will definitely put in place, hopefully, in the next year or so.
Excellent, thank you.
Mhm.
Let's see here. I'm gonna go to Lee. What is the best way to approach a joint letter of nomination or recommendation in personalizing it? Should the authors be quoted?
Oh, I've done a couple of these for someone that I two people that I co-mentored with my previous supervisor. It had both of our signature lines at the bottom. I mean, I don't object to maybe quoting the two different people, but perhaps in the sort of the middle meat of the letter, you could have a specific narrative from each person. So your introductory information is going to be the same, like what they're being nominated for, how they fit. But then in that kind of personalized thing, you could consider giving them two different perspectives and then kind of have your closing and your double signature. That's kind of an on the fly answer. I don't know if Erin, you have any, or Jeanette have thoughts on that.
I don't know. I have a little bit mixed feelings in general. Maybe you do too, Lee, about joint letters. If you are two people who have worked with that individual in a similar capacity, for example, this, the one I'm going to talk about actually pertains to building names, where a group of alumni got together and wrote a compelling letter regarding a possible honoree for a building name, but they had similar experiences, similar points of view. And so it seemed to make sense for them to write that letter together. If you have, though, more than one person who both want to write a letter, yet they have those differing experiences. So if they start together and then kind of come apart toward the middle and then come back together in the end again, I think perhaps considering having individual letters, if possible, may be a more effective way of getting the case across.
Thank you so much for that.
I think Jeanette has something to add too.
Oh, sorry, Jeanette, go ahead.
I was just going to briefly say, is there a value add to the people who are going to be reading the nomination to see that it comes from two people or a group of people rather than one? That's it.
Yep.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to jump down to some questions that have been asked live. First one is, and this probably is going to go to Lee, but it could go to Erin too. Can you share some examples of faculty or P&A promotion or recommendation letters?
That's Lee.
That could be a tricky answer. Sometimes they contain personal material. I can't remember what Minnesota laws are though, because I think there's something about like you can ask, depending on the process, you may kind of sign away your ability to view your rec letter, but I don't remember what the state of Minnesota is. Because I remember when we did this for tenure letters, it was different depending on the state they were written for. But I could see which ones I have and maybe de-identify them a bit and see if I could share that in the presentation materials that go out.
That sounds good. Thank you. Next one is related to students. Any tips on how to ask students to write letters of recommendation? And Lee, this one might be more geared towards you because you have written letters of recommendation for grad students.
I think what you want the student to write is kind of what I was talking about before, like how do they fit? Because it's strategy too. It's like strategically, how do they fit the award criteria? What would make them stand out? What have they done with concrete specific examples to illustrate how they qualify? That's kind of what you need to get from the students. And it can be, you know, maybe it would make it less stressful to just ask them to bullet point it. You know, if that is going to take away some activation energy of getting verbiage from the students, you know, send some bullet points, send some key phrases that they think would be important to go in there. Off the top of my head, that's kind of what I would do, is ask for just kind of bulleted pieces, not straight from their CV. So get them to expound a bit more on perhaps what they found important in their CV.
Thank you. My next question is actually related to CV, cover letter, resume. For those people who are more familiar with a cover letter resume, do you have any recommended resources or examples to learn how to write a CV?
Doesn't the university have a CV format? It's for faculty, but you know, there is a university format, and you could take that and take what serves you out of that, and use that as a formatting guide.
Okay, that sounds good. And we can add extra information after the fact that if people need to go back and do some more research, we'll definitely provide other information in a follow-up. Let's see here. This is kind of getting into, we discussed it previously, is that there's an art to ghostwriting nomination letters and letters of recommendation. I'm going to send this one to Lee. Do you have any tidbits of information on how to best write letters of recommendation when you're ghostwriting?
So what I tended to do is, because most of the ones I was doing were for faculty, was go out on the internet and see press releases that their potential universities had written, any news stories where their names were mentioned. I actually, because they were in-depth tenure letters, would read papers that they had written, but you know, that's probably not relevant here. But see if they were, you know, mentioned in any press release and news stories. And basically you're trying to do things to pull in something that is not on their CV, because anybody could take a CV and turn that into kind of a form letter. So you're really trying to personalize it. And even we would sometimes go into Web of Science and look up like H-index, things like that. Now it's a lot easier to find that. But you could also do things like go in and, you know, this again is quantitative, but sometimes I would add up total grant support or things like that. So again, it was trying to find things or synthesize what you did know to make it stand out as persuasive and strong and enthusiastic.
Sounds good. The person who asked the question on writing nominations, a student writing it, it was more in the approach of students writing letters of recommendations for a faculty member. Do you have any insight into that?
Go ahead, Jeanette.
I do, and this is just off the top of my head, so it may not be grounded in anything, but my thought is, in order to get students to do this, you want to share beyond the actual task of writing the letter, how this can benefit them as a student. It's going to improve their writing skills. They're going to make a good connection with some people maybe that they haven't had a connection with before. This can kind of be seen as in terms of staff, it would be a professional development opportunity. I'm not sure what you call that for students, but if there's a way to convince them to look at it as more than just a task, but as an opportunity to grow as a student and a budding professional, that may be something that you could use to encourage. Just a thought.
That's excellent. Thank you. Let's see here. A couple more questions. I think we touched on this. The most important things to remember when asking someone to write a letter of recommendation, like you're seeking someone to do that. Lee, you had mentioned, pre-draft a skeleton letter, highlight things in your CV that the person should focus on that you feel are very important. Are there any other little tidbits that you have for that?
I think my favorite one on that one is making sure the person will write you a positive recommendation.
That one, yes, very true. We will definitely highlight that in our notes. Another question for this is similar flip side is, what's the most important thing to remember when being asked to write a letter? So someone has approached you to write it. What are the most important things to consider when doing that? And I know we've gone over this already to some extent. I didn't know if there's any additional things onto that.
We haven't talked about this, is timeline. Like, don't expect to get a turnaround of, I guess it depends on the length of the letter, but I think when asking someone, respect their time. Like, don't ask for a 24-hour turnaround. Don't wait till the last minute to ask for letters. This is something that you want to give the person writing it enough time to do it when it's convenient for them, not thrown together at the last minute at the deadline. Now, if they choose to do it at the last minute, that's on them. But certainly give them time to maybe start a draft and ask questions. And at the very beginning, it's like, you need to tell them, this is the due date. Can you accommodate that? If not, please let me know by X day.
Mm-hmm.
So that if you're unable to do it because life happens, it gives them enough time to find another person.
And I think, Monica, it sounds like there may have been a flip question in there about if you are asked, what is the most important thing to think about? And I would piggyback off what Lee said, that make sure you have the time to do it if you want to do it. And also make sure that you think that you can write a strong letter. Because if you, when all is said and done, think, well, I could write an okay one, but not something that would put them over the top, it may not necessarily do that person any favors to write that letter.
Yes, very true. We had this question was asked, going up here. Going to go over to the Q&A because it was asked again. It was pre-submitted. Do you have any suggestions or best practices for resubmitting a nomination following an initially unsuccessful nomination?
I would say to contact Jeanette and I. If it has to do, I should add, with say the PAOS or the Vicky Award, that we do make ourselves available. But I think it depends on what award you submitted. And I think without looking at what was specifically submitted, it's hard to really answer that question.
But I do think that in depending on the selection committee and how it's administered, you can often ask for feedback on, you know, if this were to come in next time, what would have been kind of like the top 1 to 2 things where maybe the committee thought this was lacking or something like that. Or, you know, you could get the feedback that you just weren't ready yet, and maybe don't just take that and just probe and say, you know, why? What was the greatest weakness? Those types of questions.
That's a good point. And I think one more thing I'd say, and this pertains to the PAOS in particular, that at times the nominator has used it as an opportunity to recognize someone for a lengthy career well done. And that is great when somebody is a wonderful university citizen and it's trying to find a way for them to be recognized, say before they retire or reduce their load or whatever it is that they're doing, when really at the end of the day, say the PAOS is really looking at that demonstration of, I know the policy says unusual commitment, and I always kind of squirm when I hear unusual because it sounds unhealthy, to be honest. You know, it's really more that that very high above and beyond commitment that is illustrated through all their contributions. How is it that they have not solely done their job well, but really made that impact on individuals around them and on the work itself?
The one brief piece that I would throw in too is that if we do get asked after a nomination has gone through, and then as Erin said, we're happy to consult with people. It's our obligation to talk about the quality of the nomination packet, not the person. I'm sure you all know that, but I think that's really worth underlining.
Very true. Thank you. We probably have time for just a couple more questions. We had one more that come through Q&A. Do you have any specific recommendations for avoiding gender bias in writing letters? And I will throw that out there to the three of you.
This again is completely ungrounded, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are probably resources at the university you could reach out to that would have guidelines, examples of good and bad, the latest information. We all may have some information in it already within a few months or whatever may be dated. So I would reach out to university resources. I'd also, you know, talk, if someone has asked you to write a letter of nomination, go ahead and have the discussion up front, out loud, right there. Don't act like you think you know, or don't feel like you need to know. Go ahead and have a discussion.
Excellent. Lee, did you have anything?
One thing of note is to make sure that, and this is talking about professional titles. So, you know, if you would say Dr. Smith, but you would call someone you're writing about, you know, Tina, just make sure that you are consistent and give people with professional titles the benefit of having their titles, put them in recommendation letters. Just really think about some of the sentences that you're writing and ask yourself if you would, you know, if the gender of the nominee were flipped, would you say that about the other person? There's some language that often appears about women, for example, things like, you know, caring, or, you know, smiles a lot, and things like that. And you know, when you're talking about professional awards, yes, you want somebody to be pleasant in the workplace, but that is usually not what is driving their nomination for the award. So you really want to emphasize their accomplishments more so than you would want to emphasize some sort of stereotypical thing about either gender or any gender. So it's really thinking about emphasizing accomplishments and thinking about the language that you're using. I can think of a couple of resources that have terms in them, that adjectives to avoid and things to include. But I don't know if there's one at the University of Minnesota, but that could be something that could be included in the notes after this.
Yeah, someone replied, search for the term gender decoder to find web tools to identify language you've used in writing that align with the specific gender to see if your language is biased. So that's a good recommendation. We are almost at time. We just had one question left, but I think I will reach out to Lee, Aaron, and Jeanette to answer that in the notes document that we'll send out. But the question was related to, when putting together an award, what are good questions to ask? But we will save that one for you guys to answer outside of this, and we will send that out in the notes document when that comes out. So on that note, I'd like to, on behalf of the PNA Senate and everyone in attendance today, I want to thank our panelists, Aaron, Jeanette, and Lee, for sharing your expertise and all of the information. You've given us practical tips on writing award nominations, letters of recommendation, and we didn't touch on grant proposals, but that's okay. We appreciate the time that you took with us today. Thank you again. A link to the recording and the takeaway notes document will be available in about a week and a half to all registrants and participants. And if you would, oh, my little information here went away. It's my little promo that if you're interested in learning more about Senate governance, please visit usenate.umn.edu. And I thank you, everyone, and please enjoy the rest of your day.